moment I saw the human female stride onto our research vessel, I knew we were all going to die. Not immediately, mind you. That would have been too merciful. No, this was going to be one of those slow, agonizing affairs where you spend your final moments wondering how exactly a species that still uses combustion engines managed to outsmart an entire galactic confederation. Her name was Vera Holloway. According to the datapad, our security chief, Crick 9, had shoved into my three-fingered hands. She stood barely 5 feet tall, laughably small by Zenthari standards, with auburn hair pulled back in what humans call a ponytail and eyes the color of stormy seas. What caught my attention wasn't her size, though. It was the knife strapped to her thigh. "Commander Thex-81, I said, approaching our vessel's commanding officer with what I hoped was casual indifference. Perhaps we should discuss the human's equipment. Thex-81's mandibles clicked in amusement. At 7 feet of lean muscle and chitinous plating, he cut an imposing figure even among our kind. His forearms gestured dismissively at the view screen showing Holloway being escorted through our corridors. "That primitive relic," he scoffed, his voice carrying that particular tone of superiority that had made him so popular with the high command. "Zara 3, you worry too much. It's a piece of sharpened metal. We have plasma weapons, energy shields, and molecular disruptors. What possible threat could one small human with a kitchen utensil pose?" I wanted to point out that humans had conquered half the galaxy with primitive relics like gunpowder and nuclear fission, but Thex-81 wasn't known for appreciating historical context. Instead, I watched as our guest was led to her quarters in the civilian section, noting how her eyes tracked every security camera, every junction, every emergency panel they passed. 3 days into the mission, I found myself genuinely enjoying the human's company. Holloway had been assigned to our archaeological expedition as a cultural consultant, a diplomatic way of saying the Terran Federation wanted someone keeping an eye on what we were digging up on Kepler 442b. The planet held ruins of the extinct Vorthax civilization, and apparently humans had strong opinions about disturbing ancient burial sites. "Your species has an odd relationship with death," I observed over dinner in the mess hall. Around us, the usual collection of scientists and survey crew members picked at their nutrient paste while stealing glances at our table. Holloway looked up from her meal. Real food, naturally, because humans refused to accept that nutrition could be perfectly delivered in paste form. She'd somehow convinced our quartermaster to provide her with actual vegetables and something called chicken. "How so?" she asked, twirling a piece of pasta around her fork with mechanical precision. "You build monuments to your dead, preserve their bodies, tell stories about them for generations. Most civilized species simply recycle the organic matter and move on." I gestured with my eating utensil toward the viewport, where Kepler 442b hung like a brown jewel against the stars. Yet, here you are, worried about disturbing the graves of beings who died out 50,000 years ago. She smiled, and there was something sharp in that expression that made my secondary hearts skip a beat. "Death makes us human, Zara 3. How we treat the dead says everything about how we treat the living." "Fascinating," I muttered, though I found myself studying the way her fingers moved as she ate. Precise. Controlled. Like someone who'd spent considerable time learning to use her hands for specialized tasks. It was Dr. Yex-77 who made the discovery that changed everything. The Vorthax ruins had yielded mostly pottery shards and wall carvings until our chief archaeologist stumbled across what appeared to be a mass grave. 47 skeletal remains, arranged in a perfect circle around a central dais. "The bone scoring is unusual," Yex-77 announced during the evening briefing, his enthusiasm for dead things bubbling over as usual. These weren't ritual sacrifices or natural deaths. These individuals were killed with remarkable precision. Single strikes to vital areas, minimal struggle, almost surgical in nature. Holloway, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, looked up sharply. "May I examine the remains?" Thex-81's mandibles clicked dismissively. "I hardly think your anthropological training qualifies you to analyze xenobiology, Miss Holloway." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When Holloway smiled this time, it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Commander. I'm sure your team has everything well in hand." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Not just the mysterious deaths, but Holloway's reaction to them. I'd spent enough time around humans to recognize when they were suppressing something, and our cultural consultant was definitely hiding something. I was making my way to the observation deck when I heard voices coming from the archaeological bay. Specifically, I heard Holloway's voice, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone. "Pattern is consistent with Vorthak anatomy," she was saying. "Single entry wounds, upward angle, precise placement between the primary and secondary cardiac chambers. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." I peered around the corner and froze. Holloway was alone in the bay, standing over one of the Vorthak skeletons. Her knife, that primitive relic Thex-81 had mocked, gleamed in her hand as she gestured toward the bone damage. But here's the thing that made my blood turn to ice. She was talking to thin air, having a detailed, technical conversation about murder techniques with absolutely no one. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. Either our human consultant was completely insane, or she was communicating with someone or something that our sensors couldn't detect. Given that this was a human we were dealing with, both possibilities were equally terrifying. The next morning brought news that made the previous night's discovery seem quaint by comparison. Ensign Brix, 23, found Commander Thex-81 in his quarters, very much dead, with a single wound between his primary and secondary hearts. The exact same wound pattern we'd found on the Vorthak remains. "It's clearly a robbery gone wrong," announced Lieutenant Kex, 55, who'd assumed command after Thex-81's death. He stood in the briefing room, all four arms crossed, in a display of confidence that fooled absolutely no one. The commander's personal safe was opened. Several valuable items are missing. Dr. Yex, 77, raised a tentacle tentatively. "Sir, the wound pattern matches the archaeological specimens exactly. Don't you think that's rather coincidental?" "Coincidences happen, Doctor. We're dealing with a simple theft. The perpetrator probably used one of our own cutting tools, a plasma scalpel perhaps, or a molecular blade." I glanced at Holloway, who sat in the corner looking appropriately shocked and concerned. Her knife was nowhere to be seen. But then again, it wouldn't be, would it? "Have we considered that the killer might still be aboard?" I asked carefully. Kex 55's mandibles twitched in annoyance. "Security has been doubled. All crew members are accounted for. The criminal will be found, and justice will be served." Holloway cleared her throat delicately. "If I may, Lieutenant? I'd like to offer my assistance with the investigation. Humans have extensive experience with criminal psychology." "Oh, I'll bet they do," I thought. The investigation proceeded exactly as you'd expect. An investigation led by Lieutenant Kex, 55, to proceed, which is to say, like a collision between a cargo hauler and an asteroid field. Evidence was contaminated, witness statements were ignored, and our security chief spent most of his time developing elaborate theories about how space pirates had somehow infiltrated a ship traveling at faster-than-light speeds. Meanwhile, Holloway helpfully pointed out inconsistencies in the crew's alibis, suggested new lines of inquiry, and generally made herself indispensable to the investigation. She was particularly interested in examining the security footage from around the time of Thex-81's death. "Curious," she murmured, studying the holographic display in the security office. The footage from Corridor 7 shows a 2-minute gap right around the time of death. Crick 9, our security chief, nodded sagely. "Technical malfunction. Happens all the time." "Of course," Holloway agreed, though it's interesting how the malfunction affected only that one corridor, and only for exactly the amount of time someone would need to travel from the archaeological bay to the commander's quarters and back. "Coincidence," Crick 9 declared with the confidence of someone who'd never met a human. I was beginning to suspect that if Holloway announced she'd personally murdered Thex-81 while juggling flaming torches and singing the Zenthari national anthem, Crick 9 would classify it as an unfortunate coincidence. The second murder happened 3 days later. Dr. Yex-77 was found in his laboratory, slumped over a specimen table with the same precise wound that had killed both the Vorthak and our former commander. This time, though, there were witnesses. Sort of. Ensign Malex 41 had been working late in the adjacent storage bay when she heard what sounded like a brief struggle, followed by a soft thud. When she investigated, she found Yex-77's body and caught a glimpse of someone moving away down the corridor. "Describe what you saw," Lieutenant Kex 55 demanded during the emergency briefing. Malex 41's translator struggled with her nervous chittering. "It was dark in the corridor, sir, but I could see a figure, roughly humanoid, moving with unusual grace. They seemed to be wearing dark clothing." "Height?" Kex 55 pressed. "Difficult to determine with certainty, sir. Perhaps 5 feet? Maybe shorter." Every eye in the room turned toward Holloway, who met their gaze with perfect calm. "That's quite circumstantial," she said reasonably. "There are several crew members of similar stature. Plus, the lighting in that section has been problematic since we left port." Kex 55 nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We can't make accusations based on height alone. This could be anyone." I wanted to grab Kex 55 by his neural crest and shake him until his brain rattled, but that would have been unseemly. Instead, I found myself studying Holloway with new interest. She was right, of course. The evidence was circumstantial. But there was something about the way she dismissed it that felt practiced. Like someone who'd thought through this exact scenario before. That evening, I decided to do something that would either solve our murder problem or get me killed. Possibly both. I made my way to Holloway's quarters, palming the small recording device I'd borrowed from the evidence locker. If she really was our killer, I needed proof. If she wasn't, well, at least I'd have satisfied my curiosity before someone stuck a knife between my respiratory chambers. The corridor outside her quarters was empty, which was either fortunate or ominous, depending on your perspective. I pressed my auditory membrane to the door and listened carefully. Silence. I was about to leave when I heard it, the soft murmur of conversation. Holloway was talking to someone again, but the ship's manifest showed she was alone in there. Pattern suggests someone with extensive anatomical knowledge, her voice filtered through the door. Not just Vorthak physiology, but Zenthari as well. The killer knew exactly where to strike for maximum efficiency. A pause. "No, I don't think it's random. 3 murders, 3 perfect kills. This is someone who's Done this before. Another pause. The question is whether they're targeting the investigation team specifically, or if there's something else we're missing. I pressed closer to the door, straining to hear any response from her mysterious conversation partner. Nothing. Just Holloway's voice, calm and analytical, discussing murder techniques like she was reviewing the weather reports. That's when I felt the cold kiss of metal against my neck. You know, Holloway's voice said from directly behind me, eavesdropping is considered rude in most civilized societies. I turned slowly, very aware of the blade pressed against my carotid artery. Holloway stood there, looking utterly relaxed despite having somehow materialized behind me without making a sound. Her knife, that primitive relic, gleamed in the corridor lighting. "How did you," I began, "get behind you without you noticing?" She tilted her head, considering. Practice. Lots and lots of practice. "You were in your quarters. I heard you talking to someone." "Was I?" Her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Are you certain about that, Zara 3? The terrible thing was, I wasn't certain. About anything. The human had just demonstrated that she could move through our ship like a ghost, appear and disappear at will, and carry on conversations with invisible partners. For all I knew, she'd been standing behind me the entire time while projecting her voice into her quarters through some sort of human trickery. "The murders," I said carefully. "It's you, isn't it?" "Is it?" The knife pressed a little harder against my neck. "That's quite an accusation to make without evidence. The wound patterns match your blade." "Do they? Have you performed a forensic analysis, comparing the blade geometry to the wound characteristics? Measured the precise angles and depths? Or are you simply making assumptions based on the fact that I carry a knife?" She had a point, a terrifying, logical point that made me realize I was accusing someone of triple homicide based entirely on circumstantial evidence and personal suspicion. "However," she continued conversationally, "you're not entirely wrong." My secondary hearts stopped beating entirely. "I didn't kill your crew members, Zara 3. But I know who did. And more importantly, I know why." The knife disappeared from my neck so quickly I wasn't entirely sure it had been there at all. Holloway stepped back, giving me space to breathe and contemplate my mortality. "The Vorthek didn't die out naturally," she said matter-of-factly. "They were murdered, all of them. And whoever did it is still alive, still active, and currently aboard this ship. That's impossible. The Vorthek extinction event happened 50,000 years ago. Nothing lives that long." "Nothing from our galaxy lives that long," she corrected. "But the universe is a big place, isn't it? Full of all sorts of interesting possibilities." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was suggesting. "You're talking about extragalactic entities. That's the stuff of horror stories and bad entertainment vids." "Yes, well, humans have always had a talent for making horror stories come true." She leaned against the wall, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who'd just confessed to knowing about an ancient xenocide. "Tell me, Zara 3, have you noticed anything unusual about this mission? Any strange coincidences or inexplicable events?" I thought about it. The technical malfunctions that had plagued us since entering the Kepler system? The way crew members had been reporting odd dreams and periods of lost time? The fact that our communication array had suffered a mysterious failure just hours after discovering the mass grave? "You think something followed us back from the planet," I said slowly. "I think something was waiting for us on the planet. Something that's been very patient, very careful, and very hungry for the past 50,000 years. And you know this how exactly?" Her smile turned predatory. Because I'm not just a cultural consultant, Zara 3. I'm what humans call a specialist. My government has been tracking this particular entity for the better part of 2 centuries. We've been waiting for it to make a move. A specialist in what? Things that go bump in the night. Monsters under the bed. The sort of problems that require very specific solutions. She patted the knife at her thigh. Hence the primitive relic. Before I could ask what made an ancient piece of steel special enough to hunt cosmic horrors, the ship's emergency klaxons began wailing. The lights flickered to emergency amber, and Lieutenant Kex-55's voice crackled over the intercom. All hands to stations. We have a containment breach in the archaeological bay. This is not a drill. Holloway and I exchanged glances. I don't suppose, I said hopefully, this is just another coincidence? Afraid not. She was already moving, heading toward the archaeological section with the fluid grace of a predator. Our friend has decided to stop being subtle. We arrived at the archaeological bay to find absolute chaos. The specimen containers had been smashed, their contents scattered across the deck in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. The air tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomachs churn. Crick 9 stood in the center of the destruction, his weapon drawn, but his hands shaking. It came out of nowhere, he babbled to Kex-55. One moment the bay was empty, the next, this thing was here. Tall, thin, moving like liquid shadow. It spoke to me in Yex-77's voice, but wrong, like someone imitating speech without understanding the meaning. Where did it go? Kex-55 demanded. The ventilation system. Tore through the grating like it was paper. Holloway knelt beside one of the smashed containers, studying the damage with professional interest. How many crew members do you have aboard? Lieutenant? 43, counting yourself. And how many of them have you actually seen in the past hour? Kex-55's face went through several interesting color changes as he realized what she was implying. All hands, report to the mess hall immediately. This is a direct order. 20 minutes later, we had 38 crew members accounted for. 5 were missing. 2 engineers from the lower decks, a navigation specialist, 1 of the junior scientists, and, most ominously, our chief medical officer. Dr. Nex-12 was supposed to complete the autopsy reports, Kex-55 muttered, scrolling through his duty roster. He's been working on them for days. What autopsy reports? Holloway asked innocently. For the murder victims. Standard procedure requires full post-mortem analysis. And where would those reports be stored? Medical Bay, Section 4. Why? Holloway was already moving toward the exit. Because I suspect Dr. Nex-12 found something in those reports that our entity didn't want anyone to see. The medical bay looked like a war zone. Equipment lay scattered across the deck. Diagnostic screens flickered with corrupted data, and something that might once have been Dr. Nex-12 decorated the far wall in a pattern that defied Euclidean geometry. Don't look directly at it, Holloway warned as Kex-55 started to turn toward the remains. Trust me on this one. She moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, heading straight for the main terminal. Her fingers danced across the interface with the kind of familiarity that suggested she'd used Zenthari medical equipment before. Here we go, she murmured, pulling up Nex-12's preliminary reports. Thex-81's autopsy showed trace amounts of an unknown compound in his bloodstream, something that doesn't match any known substance in our databases. A poison? I asked. Not exactly. More like a marker. A way of tagging prey. She scrolled through the data, frowning. Yex-77's blood showed the same compound, but in higher concentrations. Like it was building up over time. Building up from what? That's the million-credit question, isn't it? She pulled up another file, this one showing cellular analysis from the Vorthak remains. Interesting. The same compound shows up in the bone marrow of our ancient friends downstairs. I stared at the screen, pieces of a horrifying puzzle starting to fall into place. You're saying this thing has been using the same hunting method for 50,000 years. I'm saying this thing is very, very good at what it does. It marks its prey, tracks them, learns their habits and weaknesses, then strikes when they're most vulnerable. She turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that made me take a step back. The question is, who else has been marked? As if in answer to her question, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in crimson light that made the medical bay look even more like a slaughterhouse. In the distance, I could hear screaming, not the normal, healthy screaming of beings in immediate danger, but the kind of soul-deep terror that suggested someone had just encountered something their mind couldn't process. "It's starting the harvest," Holloway said calmly, checking her knife. "The entity has finished marking its prey. Now it's time to collect." "How many?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "Hard to say. Could be a dozen, could be all of us. Depends on how hungry it is and how long it's been waiting." "And you're going to stop it with that?" I gestured at her blade. "This isn't just any knife, Zara 3. It's forged from steel that's been exposed to the void between galaxies, tempered in the heart of a dying star, and blessed by things that existed before your species learned to count. Most importantly, it's been fed." Fed? Blood from 17 different sapient species, each one freely given in exchange for protection from things like our current guest. She smiled, and for the first time since meeting her, I was genuinely glad she was on our side. You see, some problems require primitive solutions. The screaming was getting closer now, accompanied by the sound of metal being torn apart like paper. Whatever was hunting us had stopped being subtle. "So, what's the plan?" I asked. "Simple. We find the entity, we kill it, and we try not to die in the process." She paused. "Though I should mention, there's a good chance this thing isn't alone." "What do you mean?" "The Vorthak extinction wasn't random, Zara 3. It was systematic, coordinated, designed to clear this entire sector of higher life forms." Her eyes glinted in the emergency lighting. "I think we've wandered into someone's hunting preserve." Before I could ask who would turn an entire star system into a hunting ground, the medical bay's main door exploded inward. What came through the opening wasn't quite shadow and wasn't quite substance, but it moved with the fluid grace of a nightmare, given form. It spoke in Thex-81's voice. "Hello, little prey. Time to feed." Holloway stepped forward, her primitive relic gleaming in the crimson light. "Hello yourself," she said pleasantly. "Beautiful night for a hunt, don't you think?" And then all hell broke loose. The entity moved like spilled ink across water, flowing toward us with impossible speed. I had exactly enough time to think, well, this is how I die, before Holloway's blade carved through the air in a silver arc. The creature screamed, not with sound, but with something that bypassed my auditory organs entirely and went straight to the part of my brain responsible for primal terror. The emergency lighting flickered, as reality itself seemed to hiccup around the wound Holloway had carved through its essence. "Interesting," she commented, dancing backward as the entity reformed itself. You're not entirely corporeal, are you? That explains the vent trick. The BTYG thing wearing Thex-81's voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with dying stars. Clever little mammal. No wonder your species has survived this long. Oh, we're full of surprises, Holloway replied, spinning her knife with casual expertise. For instance, did you know humans have been tracking your kind for over 300 years? We call you shadow weavers, though I'm sure you have some appropriately dramatic name for yourselves. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, while two apex predators circled each other in what used to be our medical bay. The smart thing would have been to run, to find Lieutenant Kex-55 and let him deal with this cosmic nightmare. Instead, I found myself mesmerized by the deadly ballet unfolding before me. 300 years, the entity mused, its form shifting between solid and vapor. Impressive. Most species never realize we exist until it's far too late. Most species don't have our particular relationship with violence, Holloway said cheerfully. We've been killing things that shouldn't exist since we figured out how to sharpen sticks. You're just another addition to the list. The creature lunged forward with blinding speed. Holloway wasn't there anymore. She'd moved aside with liquid grace, her blade finding purchase in whatever passed for the entity's flank. Another reality-bending shriek filled the air. "Iron and starfire!" the entity hissed, its voice cycling through different vocal patterns now. Yex-77, Nex-12, crew members I couldn't identify. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess," Holloway lied smoothly. "Though the real question is, how many of your kind did you bring to this party?" The entity's laugh was like the sound of worlds dying. "Enough." That's when the ceiling exploded. 3 more shadows poured through the breach, moving with the same liquid grace as the first. They'd been waiting in the ventilation system, I realized with growing horror, waiting for their scout to flush out the human threat. 4 entities, 1 human with a knife. I was definitely going to die here. Holloway assessed the situation with the calm professionalism of someone who'd done this before. Many times before. "Well," she said conversationally, "this just got interesting." She pressed something on her belt, a device I'd mistaken for a standard communicator, and suddenly the air around her shimmered with barely visible energy. Some sort of personal shield, I realized, though it looked nothing like our technology. "Zara 3, she called out without taking her eyes off the circling entities. "I need you to do something for me." "What?" I managed to croak. "Get to the bridge. Tell Kex-55 to initiate emergency protocol Omega-7 and evacuate all personnel to the escape pods." "What about you?" "I'll be along shortly. Just need to take out the trash first." One of the entities laughed in a voice I recognized as belonging to Ensign Bricks 23. "Bold words for prey that's about to become dinner." "Dinner?" Holloway's eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Oh, you poor deluded things. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you?" She pressed another control on her belt, and suddenly the air filled with a low harmonic frequency that made my bones vibrate. The entities recoiled as if struck, their forms becoming less stable. "Sonic resonance," she explained helpfully. "Your kind exists partially in subspace, which makes you vulnerable to certain frequency combinations. Humans figured that out about 200 years ago, right after the incident on Proxima Centauri." "Impossible," one of the creatures snarled in Thex-81's voice. "Your species lacks the technology." "To detect you? To track you? To hunt you?" Holloway's laugh was genuinely amused. "Sweet summer child, we've been building weapons specifically designed to kill your kind since before your last feeding cycle. Did you really think we'd send our people into space without protection from the things that live in the dark, between stars? The entities exchanged glances, or whatever passed for glances among formless shadow beings. For the first time since this nightmare began, they looked uncertain. "You're bluffing," the lead entity decided. "One human cannot stand against 4 of us." "You're absolutely right," Holloway agreed. "Good thing I'm not alone." The lights suddenly blazed to full intensity, revealing figures in environmental suits stationed at every entrance to the medical bay. Humans, I realized with shock. At least a dozen of them, armed with weapons I'd never seen before. Sleek, angular devices that hummed with barely contained energy. "Vera!" one of them called out, voice muffled by his suit's respirator. "Package secure?" "4 Shadow Weavers, Alpha Class," she replied crisply. "Standard hunting pack configuration. Recommend full sterilization protocol." "Copy that. Team 2, secure the escape routes. Team 3, sonic suppression field at maximum. Let's wrap this up clean." The entities suddenly realized they'd walked into a trap. A very professional, very thorough trap set by beings who'd clearly done this before. "The Terran Federation," the lead entity whispered, its voice cycling through the vocal patterns of everyone it had consumed. "You're not explorers. You're exterminators." "Oh, we're explorers too," Holloway said brightly. "We explore, we catalog, we file reports, and when we find things like you, we solve the problem permanently." The battle was over in seconds. The humans' weapons discharged with sounds like reality tearing, and the entities simply ceased. Not destroyed, not killed, erased, as if they'd never existed at all. "Temporal disruptors," Holloway explained, noting my shocked expression. "They don't just kill Shadow Weavers, they retroactively prevent them from having existed in this timeline. Very clean, very final." I stared at the empty medical bay, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. "How long have you known?" "About the entities, about this mission." "About 3 years. We've been tracking this particular pack since they wiped out a colony on Ross, 128. The archaeological expedition was cover. We needed a legitimate reason to visit Kepler 442b without alerting them to our presence. The entire mission was fake? Not fake, just multi-purpose." She holstered her knife and pulled off her communicator, revealing it to be significantly more sophisticated than standard Zenthari equipment. "We really are interested in Vorthak culture. Learning how an entire civilization falls to Shadow Weavers helps us prevent it from happening to others." Lieutenant Kex-55 chose that moment to arrive with a full security team, his weapon drawn and his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. He stopped short when he saw the humans in environmental suits, his brain clearly struggling to process the situation. "What? Who are these people?" he demanded. "Cleanup crew," Holloway said simply. "Don't worry, Lieutenant. The threat has been neutralized. Your ship is safe." "Threat? What threat? And why are there armed humans aboard my vessel?" One of the suited figures stepped forward and removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and gray eyes that had seen too much. "Captain Marcus Webb, Terran Federation Special Operations. Sorry for the deception, Lieutenant, but this mission was classified at the highest levels." "What mission?" Kex-55's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "This was supposed to be a simple archaeological survey." "It was, for you." Webb's tone was matter-of-fact, the voice of someone delivering bad news with professional detachment. "For us, it was a hunt. Your people accidentally wandered into a feeding ground, and we needed to clean up the mess before it spread." "Feeding ground?" The entire Kepler system, Holloway explained patiently. The Shadow Weavers have been using it as a hunting preserve for the past 50,000 years. They'd lure in exploration vessels, feed on the crews, then wait for the next batch of victims. Very sustainable, from their perspective. I found my voice at last. The Vorthak. They weren't the first civilization to die here, were they? 17th, according to our research, Webb confirmed. The Weavers are patient hunters. They can wait millennia between feeding cycles if necessary. Kex 55's legs gave out, and he slumped against a damaged medical scanner. 17 civilizations, billions of beings. Which is why we developed the tools to hunt them, Holloway said, patting her knife again. This blade has ended 3 separate Shadow Weaver infestations. Each time we learn a little more about how to fight them. But why help us? I asked. Your species barely tolerates the Zenthari Confederation. We've been trade rivals for decades. Webb and Holloway exchanged glances, and I caught something in their expressions, a kind of grim amusement that made my skin crawl. Because, Holloway said slowly, Shadow Weavers don't stop at single civilizations. They breed, they spread, they turn entire galactic sectors into hunting grounds. She gestured toward the viewport where Kepler 442b still hung in space. If we hadn't stopped them here, they'd have followed your ship back to Zenthari space, then spread from there to every inhabited system in the local cluster. Extinction cascades, Webb added. We've seen it happen twice before. Once you let Shadow Weavers establish territory, they're almost impossible to root out. Better to catch them while they're still contained. The full implications hit me like a plasma torpedo to the brain. The humans hadn't just saved our ship. They'd potentially saved every sapient species in 3 star systems. And they'd done it by setting us up as bait. You used us, I said. We protected you, Holloway corrected. The Weavers would have found your expedition eventually, with or without our intervention. This way, you survived the encounter. Most of us survived, I said pointedly, thinking of Thex-81, Yex-77, and the others. Her expression softened slightly. Yes, I'm sorry about that. We tried to minimize casualties, but Shadow Weavers are clever hunters. They needed to establish a feeding pattern before we could track them effectively. You let them kill our people to bait a trap. We let them kill a few of your people to prevent them from killing all of your people, Webb said bluntly. Plus, every other species they'd encounter afterward. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best one available. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage about human duplicity and the casual way they'd sacrificed my crewmates for the greater good. Instead, I found myself thinking about those 17 extinct civilizations, about billions of beings who died because no one had been there to make the hard choices. How do you live with it? I asked quietly. Making decisions like that? Holloway was quiet for a long moment, cleaning her blade with practiced motions. Someone has to, she said finally. The universe is full of things that want to eat us, possess us, or worse. Someone has to stand between civilization and the dark. Might as well be us. Why humans, though? Why not the Zenthari, or the Kellans, or any of the other advanced species? Because, Webb said with a tired smile, most advanced species are too civilized to do what needs doing. They've evolved beyond the kind of primal violence required to fight cosmic horrors. Humans, well, we've maintained our capacity for creative brutality. You're saying civilization is a weakness? I'm saying it can be. When you're facing something that exists outside the normal rules of reality, sometimes you need people who are comfortable breaking those rules right back. The cleanup took another 2 hours. The human special operations team was thorough to the point of obsession, scanning every surface for trace amounts of Shadow Weaver essence, purging the ship's computer systems of corrupted data, and conducting detailed interviews with every surviving crew member. Memory modification, Webb explained when I asked about the interviews. Nothing invasive, just removing the more traumatic details. Your crew will remember a tragic accident, some equipment failures, and a helpful human consultant who assisted with the investigation. But not the truth. The truth would drive most of them insane, Holloway said matter-of-factly. Trust me, ignorance is a gift in this case. What about me? She studied my face carefully. You handled the revelation better than most. Strong mental resilience, good analytical thinking, and you didn't panic when reality started bending around us. The Federation could use people like you. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose. The Shadow Weavers aren't the only things lurking in the spaces between stars. There are older things, hungrier things, and things that make cosmic horror look like a friendly neighborhood barbecue. Her smile was sharp as her blade. Someone needs to keep watch. Someone needs to make sure the nightmares stay where they belong. I thought about my comfortable life aboard research vessels, cataloging dead civilizations and writing academic papers about xenoarchaeology. Then I thought about 17 extinct species and the hungry darkness that had consumed them. What would I be doing exactly? Learning to use weapons that shouldn't exist. Training to fight enemies that defy physics. Protecting civilizations that will never know you saved them. Webb's expression was serious. It's dangerous work, minimal pay, and the retirement plan is usually death by cosmic horror. But the benefits package includes saving the galaxy on a regular basis. Tempting offer, I said dryly. Think about it, Holloway suggested. In the meantime, we need to finish cleaning up here. The human team worked with military precision, removing every trace of the Shadow Weaver presence. They even repaired the damage to the ship's systems, though I noticed they installed several new pieces of equipment that definitely weren't standard Zenthari technology. Monitoring systems, Webb explained when I asked. If any more Weavers show up in this sector, we'll know about it. You're watching everything, aren't you? Monitoring communications, tracking ship movements, cataloging potential threats. We prefer the term galactic security, Holloway said with a straight face. But yes, essentially. Someone has to keep an eye on things. And other species just accept this? Other species don't know about it. As far as the galactic community is concerned, humans are slightly aggressive traders with an inexplicable talent for being in the right place at the right time when disasters strike. Webb chuckled. Amazing how often lucky coincidences happen around human merchant vessels, isn't it? By the time the human team finished their work, it was as if the Shadow Weavers had never existed. The official record would show equipment failures, accidental deaths, and a successful completion of the archaeological mission. The Vorthak ruins would be classified as historically significant, but ultimately routine. The truth would be buried in files so classified that most humans would never see them. One more thing, Holloway said as her team prepared to depart. The knife. What about it? Thex-81 was right, in a way. It is a primitive relic. She drew the blade, holding it up to catch the light. This particular piece of metal is over 1,000 years old. It's been carried by human shadow hunters since before we had faster-than-light travel. The blade looked ordinary enough, steel and leather, simple and functional, but there was something about the way light moved across its surface that suggested depths I couldn't fathom. Each hunter adds to its power, she continued. Blood willingly given, victories earned, sacrifices made. By now, it's less a weapon and more a repository of human determination. Determination to do what? To survive. To protect our own. To make sure the things that hunt in the dark remember why they should fear the light. She sheathed the blade with practiced ease. Your commander was wrong about humans, Zara 3. We're not primitive. We're focused. Focused on what? Staying alive, and making sure everything else that deserves to live gets the same chance. The human team departed as quietly as they'd arrived, leaving behind a ship full of confused Zenthari and one archaeologist with a head full of dangerous knowledge. Lieutenant Kex-55 never quite figured out what had happened, though he did file an impressive report about equipment failures and tragic accidents. The memorial service for our dead was held 3 days later. Simple affair. Some words about duty and sacrifice, the traditional recycling of organic matter, and the official declaration that their deaths had not been in vain. The crew seemed satisfied with the explanation that they'd died heroes, advancing the cause of galactic scientific knowledge. I stood at the back of the ceremony, thinking about primitive relics and the humans who carried them, about the price of civilization and the cost of ignorance, about 17 dead species and the monsters that had consumed them. After the service, I made my way to the communication array and composed a message to a very specific Terran Federation address that Holloway had provided. To whom it may concern, I began, I would like to discuss employment opportunities in the field of galactic security. 6 months later, I was aboard a human vessel called the Righteous Fury, learning to use weapons that violated several laws of physics and training to fight nightmares that most species couldn't even conceptualize. My instructor was a grizzled human named Marcus Webb, and my partner was a cheerful woman who carried a 1,000-year-old knife and talked to shadows. The thing about humans, Holloway explained during one of our training sessions, is that we've never really stopped being prey animals. We just got very, very good at killing the things that hunted us. She was teaching me to use a weapon called a void cutter, a blade that could sever connections between dimensions. Apparently, this was considered basic equipment for human shadow hunters. Every species develops differently, she continued, adjusting my grip on the weapon's handle. The Zenthari became master engineers. The Kellans perfected philosophy and mathematics. The Vorthak achieved perfect social harmony. And humans? Humans learned to fight. We learned to adapt. We learned to take the worst the universe could throw at us and throw it back twice as hard. She stepped back, studying my stance. Sometimes the galaxy needs engineers and philosophers and social harmony. But sometimes it needs people who are willing to walk into the dark and make sure the monsters stay there. Is that what we are? Monsters fighting monsters? Sometimes. But here's the thing. Zara 3, we choose our targets. We protect the innocent, we save the helpless, and we make sure civilizations like yours get to keep building beautiful things instead of becoming midnight snacks for cosmic horrors. I thought about that as I practiced with the void cutter, trying to master techniques that would have been considered black magic by my own species. About humans with their primitive relics and impossible weapons, standing guard at the edge of known space. About the price they paid to keep the rest of us safe. 3 years later, I was part of the team that discovered a shadow weaver nest in the Andromeda approach. 17 entities, building toward a full extinction event that would have consumed everything in the local galactic arm. We stopped them. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, and it definitely wasn't something we could put in any official reports. But 43 different species continued to exist because a handful of humans with impossible weapons and primitive relics decided that some things were worth fighting for. I still carry that void cutter Holloway taught me to use. It's saved my life more times than I can count, and I've added my own small victories to its edge. The blade hums sometimes when I'm not looking, and I swear I can hear whispers in languages that predate written history. But I sleep well at night, knowing that somewhere in the dark between stars, there are humans with ancient knives and modern weapons, keeping watch over the galaxy. Because someone has to stand guard. Someone has to make sure the monsters remember why they should stay in the shadows. And sometimes, the best defense against cosmic horror is a species crazy enough to hunt it for sport. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it's also full of things that would devour those wonders without hesitation. Fortunately for the rest of us, it's also full of humans. Primitive, violent, absolutely terrifying humans who've turned monster hunting into an art form. I wouldn't have it any other way.